Well, it's not normal, is it? You've got Israel undertaking military action against Iran without the sanction or, I think, the approval even of the United States. We can add that to the list of sentences that 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I could never quite imagine myself saying out loud. We know, of course, that there will be response, there will be retaliation, and we know, and we hope that it will fail. Some of the people targeted by the Israeli regime will not be mourned by anybody except people who sympathise with the worst sort of activities. But the question that popped into my mind this morning was whether or not even this now needs to be viewed through the lens of Benjamin Netanyahu's self-preservation. It was such a helpful insight when we first stumbled upon it or when we first worked it out. And please don't think I'm suggesting it took you as long to work it out as it did me. But I move very cautiously in this space, as you know, and for obvious reasons, as indeed I think everybody should. But when you came to a full understanding of the legal jeopardy in which he finds himself and the simple truth of the fact that the only way to stay out of court is to stay in power, you understand immediately two or three things. You understand why he has elevated in his administration people with appalling views and track records up to and including convictions for supporting terrorist organisations. Yes, that would be the security minister. And you understand why he persists in the persecution and slaughter of Palestinian people and moves back, reverses, abandons carefully negotiated ceasefire plans, secure in the knowledge that some corners of the world's media will contrive to excuse him from responsibility and culpability for that. You understand how he can ride roughshod over the wishes of the hostages' families and just continue on a path of almost pure self-preservation. But I mean, listen, sometimes there are simple answers to complicated questions, but generally speaking, there aren't. It's the world of the demagogue and the unpleasant populist to provide simple answers to complicated questions. So is it the case that the geopolitical situation, the geopolitical scenario demands that we dig a little deeper? I mean, is there more to this than Netanyahu's desperation to continue the what would you call it, the siege mentality that Israel historically and most recently finds itself under in order to protect its own position? In order to protect its own position. I'm going to do something I don't often do on these kind of topics because I'm going to need your help today. Anthony writes, scientists murdered, that's okay, is it? Absolutely not, no. Graham says, do you think Iran now has the right to defend itself? And by that I don't mean destroy huge areas of residential housing, schools and hospitals. And Marty says, don't you think that the scientists, technicians, plant workers will be mourned by their family? I never thought I'd hear Job say something so heartless. I said some of the people, Martin, won't be mourned by anyone. And you're absolutely right to remind us that some of the people will. Although, if you're working on nuclear capabilities for a regime like the one in Iran, then you have no doubt had some fairly complicated conversations with your conscience long before the latest attacks unfolded. Questions to which nobody knows the definitive answer, but which we will nudge towards today, include how significant is it that Trump clearly didn't want this to happen? You remember Trump, the guy who said he was going to make the world a safer place and that everyone who would do his bidding, often to be found tickling the toes of Vladimir Putin, whose illegal invasion of Ukraine shows no signs of being abandoned. And he is, or his administration is currently involved in negotiations with the Iranians. I have absolutely no idea what the overnight events do to those negotiations. We'll hear a lot today about Israel's right to defend itself, but it's a sort of preemptive defence, isn't it? Attacking nuclear sites and military commanders. And yet the Americans are at great pains to stress that it is a unilateral action. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, saying we are not involved in strikes against Iran and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. But he has added that Israel told the US that it believed the attack on Iran was necessary for its self-defense. And if that were true, and I'm not for a moment suggesting that it isn't, if that were true, then it would be quite hard to object, wouldn't it? I mean, if you had a compelling case for believing that Iran had both nuclear ambitions and an expressed desire to use any future nuclear capability to attack Israel, then you would have grounds for this intervention. I don't know how big a quibble it is to point out that there are senior members of Israel's government who've called for a nuclear bomb to be dropped on Gaza. Would that give a disinterested third party the right to attack Israel's nuclear facilities because members of their government have outspokenly called for nuclear bombs to be dropped on the Gaza Strip? I mention that because I don't want to sound like an idiot. I know what you're thinking. It's probably too late. It's complicated. I don't think Gaza is complicated anymore. I think it's just heartbreaking, and I think what is being done there is likely to reach the criteria for genocide if it hasn't already. It's not really for me to decide. It's for international courts. But if Kenneth Roth, who ran Human Rights Watch for 30 years and is self the son of a Holocaust survivor, is comfortable with that word, then I am certainly not going to criticise him. So I don't think that is complicated anymore. And I think, tragically, the lens through which you understand it completely, the lens through which you can completely understand it, is the lens of Netanyahu's self-preservation. If I was a hawkish supporter, I don't know how you tell the difference anymore between a hawkish supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu and a sort of a reluctant fellow traveller whose understanding of the necessity of the modern state of Israel existing leaves you to end up tacitly going along with what he's been doing in Gaza. I honestly don't know how to tell the difference anymore. But if I were the former, if I were a hawkish supporter of Netanyahu, I probably would be reaching for explanations that chalk this up as entirely necessary and entirely due to self-defense. And that, of course, also leads us into the tricky territory of wondering who is qualified to answer these questions. Hawkish supporters of Netanyahu, people who are still comfortable with the quite plausible, with the ethnic cleansing and with what many people consider to be the genocide currently unfolding in Gaza, are highly unlikely to have a problem with this. You know, if you are, quotes, cool, end quotes, with 53,000 dead Palestinians, then you're not going to be losing any sleep over a few dead Iranians, are you? And indeed, the argument that he is running out of Palestinians to kill, so he's moved on to Muslims in other parts of the Middle East, is one that I'm already seeing in my inbox. But what I don't want to do is carry my disgust and revulsion from Gaza to Iran. I want to understand whether or not the geopolitical circumstances, the context of the attacks upon Iran, it is measurably and crucially different from the continuing attacks on Gaza. And that's what I'm going to ask you. I know it's a big one, but it's Friday. You can take the whole weekend to relax afterwards. But the temptation will be, and it's a temptation that I feel, okay, so I want to get that out there as well. The temptation will be that the latest attacks are part of the same picture as the attacks on Gaza. I, in my bones, want to resist that temptation. But I want you to tell me whether we should. Is this just Netanyahu prioritising his self-preservation over absolutely everything else, ramping up the siege mentality under which Israel lives, and creating yet more, a yet stronger case for his continuing power, for his continuing residency in power? Or is this different? Is this something that actually has a justification on a moral plane that disappeared from the Gaza scenario months, if not years ago? 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. Would you like to hear some of the messages I get already at times like this? So A's been in touch, say Gaza death toll as reported by Hamas, J.O. takes it as gospel. Mate, seriously, let me send some British journalists in, or some American journalists. Let me send some journalists from reputable international news organisations in to undertake a more reliable death toll, a death toll that you would trust more. And I'm all for it, seriously. I'll bite your arm off. You'd have to explain to me why Israel doesn't want journalists describing what is going on in Gaza. And while we're at it, we'd probably throw in the time that they killed loads of aid workers, lied about it, and the truth only came out when they found a mobile phone in the pockets of one of the men that they'd murdered. But hey, you tell me about who's telling the truth and what's gospel, champ. So there it goes. You've got to stop calling it, says Edmund, from a different perspective, a preemptive defence, James. It's just an attack. If Iran had attacked Israel as opposed to their proxies, you wouldn't call it a preemptive defence, and rightly so. Adam writes, you're disgusting biased comments about Israel, and just one basket case theocracy writes, will attacking another. So you will know that the mission we set ourselves on this programme, the challenge we set ourselves on this programme, is to ignore most of the madness, to ignore people who will be reaching for the anti-Semitism allegation or people who will be reaching for the actual anti-Semitism, and try, if we can, to plot a path through the facts that allows us to answer the questions that we have chosen to ask. And those questions are pretty straightforward. Should we resist the temptation to chalk this up as yet more evidence of Benjamin Netanyahu's absolute willingness, in fact, one might say deep desire, to carry on killing people outside Israel in order to keep the sense of emergency on the ground, and probably declared a state of emergency given that there will be retaliations, the Iron Dome notwithstanding? Should we resist the temptation to just see this as another step on Benjamin Netanyahu's megalomania and desperate desire to stay out of court and quite possibly out of jail? And it doesn't matter how much peril he draws down for future generations on Israel, or how many Muslims or Arabs, how many Iranians or Palestinians he kills. Should we resist that temptation? Is this different? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You haven't mentioned the hostages once, writes Arnold. You mean about the, except for the bit where I explained how Benjamin Netanyahu has ridden roughshod over the express wishes of all the hostages' families, Arnold. You've got to wash your ears out, mate, if you're going to try and contribute to a programme, because the grown-ups are talking now.